Milei leads Argentina into chaos, sales collapse, activity falls, and prices soar. Despite the short time that has elapsed, we note with concern the profound impact of Milei's measures on people's lives and rights. In little more than 3 months, poverty has multiplied in Argentina, while Milei's popularity plummets. Visualeconomik community, the criticisms are falling like flaming arrows on Argentina's new government. Many polls suggest that Milei's popularity may be starting to plummet. Economic expectations are low, poverty is increasing, and in the face of such uncertainty, one thing is clear: Argentina's economic shock has begun. As we have already warned in many previous videos, the adjustments needed to save Argentina from becoming the new Venezuela were not going to be easy, and in fact, Milei himself was very clear about it.
La conclusión es que no hay alternativa al ajuste y no hay alternativa al shock. Naturalmente, eso impactará de modo negativo sobre el nivel de actividad, el empleo, los salarios reales, la cantidad de pobres e indigentes.
We are sorry to say, but the predictions have come true. 3 months after the arrival of the new government, sales of small and medium entrepreneurs have plummeted by almost 30%. Poverty has increased by 13 points. Worst of all, the year-on-year inflation rate has practically doubled. We are talking about 276%, a record not seen for at least 33 years. Some reports indicate that real wages have been reduced by 23% in the last 3 months. But again, this is something we already explained. It was already known that it was going to happen, but still, the criticism is heartbreaking. Milei's popularity seems to be falling at breakneck speed.
After winning the elections with 56% of the vote, now the majority of citizens, up to 55%, rate Milei's management negatively.
Milei came to power, saying that the adjustments would be paid by politicians, that the population had nothing to worry about. But here we must be clear, that was a totally impossible mission. Argentina's accounts were shattered. The government had to cut not only in political spending, but also, inevitably, in social matters. And that is exactly what it is doing. The main item of the tax cut is focusing on retirement pensions. This item alone accounts for 35.4% of the total budget adjustment. Then, in turn, another 10.3% of cuts in social benefits must be added. These cuts alone could explain much of the drop in popularity of Freedom Moves Forward, but the criticisms go much deeper. You see, one of the first measures taken by the libertarian president after taking office was the devaluation of the peso. That is, the reduction of 50% of its official value with respect to the dollar. Many point out that this has caused inflation and that it is a robbery of Argentine savings, as the value of their money has been cut. On the other hand, Milei has also deregulated some economic sectors, such as rentals. This is something that many point out as a punishment to tenants who will be unprotected against landlords. Visualeconomik viewers, it is clear that if we look at the traditional media, Argentina looks little more than a state in flames, a failed government, and an economy in accelerated collapse. But is that really the case? Or are we looking at a huge smear campaign against Milei? And where exactly does the new libertarian Argentina stand beyond the headlines? Well, we're going to take a look right now. Milei came to power with a very clear slogan: end inflation.
Estamos totalmente abocados en terminar con la inflación, de evitar la hiperinflación.
As we've seen before, the results do not look promising. Year on year, inflation has not only slowed, but has reached a 30-year high. Many media outlets blame the new government for this inflationary acceleration, and therefore, the question is clear. Has Milei triggered inflation in Argentina? Well, the answer at first glance is yes, and indeed, devaluation is to blame. At the beginning of last December, Milei announced the devaluation of the peso, and right from that moment, inflation doubled in just 1 month. Now, why does devaluing increase inflation? Well, you see, until the arrival of Milei, companies that wanted to buy foreign products could do so at an artificially low exchange rate. In other words, if regular people using the market exchange rate needed 1,000 pesos to buy $1, importing companies had the privilege of buying dollars at less than half the price. And where do you think the cheap dollars were coming from? In effect, they came out of the state. The government subsidized imports through an artificial exchange rate. As a result, companies had low import costs costs, and imported products could then be sold more cheaply in Argentine stores. The problem is that with the devaluation, the artificial exchange rate stopped being so cheap and resembled the real exchange rate. With this adjustment, Milei's government practically stopped subsidizing importers. And what was the result? Indeed, higher inflation. As importers are paying the real price, they now have to sell their products more expensively in the stores. Now, does this mean that Milei's management is a disaster? Well, I'm sorry for the Peron lovers and the anti-liberal socialists, but no, not at all. And come to think of it, what exactly does inflation measure? Theoretically, inflation measures the increase in retail prices. If an apple is worth 100 pesos and the following year it goes up to 200 pesos, we say that there has been a 100% inflation. However, the measure of inflation is often a bit tricky, especially if we are talking about government-subsidized products. For example, let's go back to the case of the apple. Let's imagine that, as before, the price rises from 100 to 200 pesos. However, as the government wants to keep the population happy, it decides to subsidize 100 pesos to the supermarket in exchange for keeping the price unchanged. In this case, the consumer will continue to pay the same as the previous year. Inflation will be 0%, but the government will be paying the difference through public spending. As you can see, inflation measures exclusively the direct price paid by consumers and completely ignores government spending. And what implications does this have for Milei's Argentina? With the devaluation, by no longer subsidizing imports, the government has transferred public spending to the price paid by the consumer. In reality, the products themselves are neither more expensive nor more costly. Prices now simply reflect the real cost that was previously artificially manipulated by the government. However, this does not only apply to devaluation, but also to other subsidies, such as public transportation.
Milei's chainsaw plan cuts subsidies to public transportation in Argentina.
So to summarize, we can say that yes, inflation increased after the start of Milei's shock plan. Even so, this does not directly translate into a higher cost for Argentine society, as the government is now saving all the money it used to spend on subsidies. Be that as it may, you're probably wondering if it is worth it. I mean, what's the point of the government saving if it means higher prices for Argentines? There are several reasons, and the first one can be seen in the following graph. Exports in Argentina have soared. In just 100 days after Milei's arrival, they have increased by about 17%. The devaluation has made the peso less valuable, so it is now much more affordable for foreign customers to buy products in Argentina. And in the medium to long term, this will have two consequences. On the one hand, Argentina's export fabric will develop, and more powerful industries will be created. And believe me, the latter is very important. Argentina is the G20 country with the lowest working population of all. Nearly 55% of the working age population is neither working nor looking for work. This does not mean that there's no work. It means that Argentines simply do not want to work. In this sense, and as cruel as it may seem, price increases and subsidy cuts are likely to drive many Argentines to work, and that would boost the economy in the medium to long term. What's more, as importing is now more expensive, business opportunities for the local market are likely to emerge that will serve to replace imports. Let me explain. For example, if screws used to be imported from China, now after the devaluation, it will be more expensive to import them, and that means that screw factories could emerge in Argentina itself. In any case, perhaps the most important long-term effect of the devaluation will be the control of reserves. Since the Argentine government no longer has to spend millions of dollars subsidizing imports, dollar reserves in the central bank have started to increase like crazy. To which, by the way, we must add another factor that also contributes to the increase in reserves: fiscal adjustment. Despite cuts in painful items such as pensions and social programs, the budget cut has managed to clean up Argentina's public accounts in record time. In a single month, Milei has managed to go from a 5% deficit to achieving 2 straight months of budget surpluses after 12 years of constant deficits. All these changes are generating enormous confidence in the financial markets. Investors are confident that, in the long term, the Argentine government will be able to control the value of the peso, the deficit, and thus be able to repay its debts. And how do we know? Well, look, proof of this increased confidence is that, for example, the stock market price of companies in which the state is heavily invested, such as YPF, has soared. We are talking about no less than 61% in the last few months, since Milei won the first round of the elections. Meanwhile, investment banks such as Goldman Sachs have encouraged their clients to invest in Argentine government bonds. And all this has translated into the fact that the value of public debt bonds of this country has begun to soar. They already exceed values not seen since 2019. 2017. Many of these debt bonds are owed by the central bank. They are government promises to pay, but instead of waiting and collecting when the due date arrives, the central bank can sell to the market for an ever-increasing value. The greater the confidence, the more valuable the bonds will be, and with them, the more dollar reserves the central bank will be able to accumulate. And the question is, why is it important for the central bank to accumulate dollar reserves? Firstly, because if the longed-for dollarization is achieved, these reserves will play a fundamental role during the transition. But secondly, because until very recently, Argentina's central bank was on the verge of collapse.
On December 7th, 2023, the last working day of Alberto Fernandez's presidency, the BCRA's net reserves were plunged into negative territory.
With negative net reserves, the Argentine central bank basically ran out of dollars in net terms. And this had a knock-on effect. For example, it led to a terrible situation with the importing companies in the country. Because do you remember that we said that the government provided the importing companies with an artificially low exchange rate? For this, the central bank needed dollars with which to exchange the pesos of the importing companies so that they could buy their products abroad. The problem? That if the central bank had negative reserves, then it could not give dollars to importing companies. The result was that Argentine importing companies started to get into debt. That is, to be unable to pay their foreign suppliers. So much so that by December 2023, 80% of Argentina's imports were being defaulted on, something that, thanks to the increase in reserves, Milei is now managing to remedy. And Visualeconomik viewers, this is something particularly important. Milei is criticized for having made imports more expensive with the devaluation, but the alternative under the previous government could have ended in an absolute trade blockade. Without dollars, international supplies could have been cut off altogether. And yes, with Milei, importing will now be more expensive, but the stability of the supply system seems to have been restored at a dizzying pace. Nevertheless, in this whole issue of reserves, there is perhaps an even more important point, a fact that represents a historical milestone in the Argentine economy, the stabilization of the market value of the peso. Since Milei's arrival, the peso has entered an impressive state of stability. Argentines who have saved their assets in pesos have lost virtually none of the value of their savings against the dollar. If you notice, this means that although the inflation figure is apparently high, in reality, the cost of living is not very different from a few months ago. With the same salary, you can buy the same dollars as before on the black market. Once again, fiscal stability and international reserves play a key role here. First of all, spending cuts have reduced the need to print banknotes, have limited the population's spending, and this will sooner or later curb prices. What's more, do you remember that following the devaluation, prices in Argentina skyrocketed? Well, take a look. Well, if we measure prices in monthly terms, in February and March, inflation has plummeted to levels even lower than December, before Milei's arrival. In other words, although inflation initially soared, Milei, with the confidence of the markets, with the accumulation of reserves, and with his fiscal adjustments, has already managed to bring inflation down to a lower figure than the one he found when he took office. Guess what? There's more. Another milestone of the new government has been the liberalization of some crucial sectors. For example, do you remember that many people criticized the deregulation of the rental market? Well, this deregulation has been a complete success. The supply of housing on the market has skyrocketed, and in just 100 days, prices have dropped by more than 20%. This is huge. It's an example of historical liberalization that is bound to be studied in the textbooks. And the fact is that, yes, it is true. Argentina is having a hard time. The shock is hard, and many pensioners, former civil servants, or people who have lost their benefits are having a really hard time. But Argentina, at macroeconomic levels, is doing much better than we would have expected. The recovery at the street level, at the personal level, will be slow. Investment has yet to come to Argentina, but with time, there will be more and more companies, more jobs, and more opportunities. And Visualeconomik community, in order to reach that goal, achieving stability is the first task of all, and that is being achieved. Of course, the future is still uncertain. We don't know whether Milei's measures can be implemented as originally intended. We don't know whether reforms such as the labour market reform can pass parliamentary scrutiny, and we don't know whether Milei will change his mind and start making mistakes. But so far, everything is proceeding as expected, and even aspects such as budget stability have been achieved in record time. In any case, now it's your turn. Do you think Milei will finish his term improving the lives of Argentines? How long will it take for macroeconomic stability to be reflected in people's lives? Will Milei be able to implement his program? You can leave your answers down in the comments. If you like the video, please like it, subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. See you soon.